That was Bruce Springsteen with Jungle Land here on 88.1 FM WVYC. This is the voice of your college. This voice belongs to Keelan Tollinger, your host for the next hour from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. You're listening to In the Studio, the first edition of the spring 2019 semester. Maybe you're a first-time listener, transferred to the school last week or something, or maybe you've been tuning in this whole thing for months now, but wherever you're from, this is a show dedicated to some underground music and breaking down the past week's biggest news and a few topics here and there that you might have missed. If you're curious about any of my past shows, maybe get yourself caught up. I always throw in this plug. All you need to do is go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger. And you can find a whole archive of shows that I've done in the past. I think it's been about like a dozen or 13 now. The point is, all the monologuing of mine without the music. It's kind of like listening to a podcast, though. So no matter which way you're listening, though, thanks for tuning in and joining me on what'll be my last semester on the radio. So I said about a dozen shows took place in the fall. If you take like the 2 full school years I've been broadcasting since then, so like 24 my sophomore year, up to 48 by junior year, I'd say 60 shows in my college career so far is a good guess, and if all goes well, I'll get past 70 in my final months as an amateur DJ. And I appreciate everybody who joined me along the way as guests, co-hosts, and listeners. But there's also plenty more stuff to be heard, songs, words, awkward pauses, I guess. But yeah, let's make it a good semester and give it our best shot. So first of all, the biggest story on campus this week has to be that polar vortex. So York hit about 0 degrees on Tuesday and Wednesday night, but I mean in the Midwest and Minnesota, like minus 20 degrees in temperatures, like the wind chill was like down to minus 50, minus 60. There was like footage of like boiling water, freezing in midair, a problem for like the homeless shelters, of course. I mean, rail traffic, airports, I mean, mail, postal services disrupted. In the library in Campbell Hall on campus, the water pipes froze briefly just yesterday. And I mean, if you think we have a small campus, I mean, now you feel just how like spaced apart everything is, trying to walk from building to building with just that air being so cold. And I think it's even like the quickest time in 4 spring semesters that there was like a closing or a delay with like the snow on Tuesday, canceling everything by 3:30. And I remember, like, with, like, the polar vortex and all, it's not a very common thing, but I think it first slipped into our vocabulary in, like, senior year of high school. Back when it was, like, so cold back in northeast Pennsylvania to start, like, doing cancellations and everything. Meteorology would like to use it now to, like, either make the weather more discussable or hint about climate change. But there is a bright side in that warmer weather is supposed to be coming next week. I mean, even record-breaking warmth. 50 degrees on Tuesday or something, but for now, like the first Friday plans, I'll let you know how those are going with the weather checks at the 15-minute and 45-minute mark in the hour. Also, just like to cap the whole polar vortex thing, I love President Trump's tweet like a couple days ago, like, what the H is going on with global whamming? Just, oh, I don't know. It is quite a mess. But if you did need a place to warm up on campus, I mean, there's no better place than the new Starbucks in the Humanities building on the 2nd floor. So the workers got it completed very quickly after we finished up the fall semester. There's a sign on the wall in the main hallway with a logo on. It's a great looking place. People are saying it's like probably better looking than most of the Starbucks they've seen back home. It's got tables with high seats, a lounge area with more comfortable chairs. I said it before, I'll say it again when it was being like instructed. I mean, I won't buy much from there. I'm not a coffee drinker. And considering my name, when the baristas go to write my name on the plastic cups, yeah, it's going to be quite a difficult time. But there's actually a bit of a dilemma with like staffing and students. Like if you want to sign up to be an employee of Starbucks now, I mean, good luck, because there's so many workers now that some of them kind of just like mill about with nothing to do. And yet there's still some longer lines, like people waiting. I mean, there's got to be like a dozen or more people between classes, from what I've seen, waiting for coffee. And I don't know what that's going to do for them to get to class on time. But regardless, the Humanities building has a new attraction now. I mean, Campbell Hall in the business section has Apple Cafe. and I'm still trying to figure out like the Starbucks and the college food providers relationship. Like I'm talking about Chartwell's, how they sort of had like give up their venue in the Create Cafe at first, in order to have Starbucks installed in there. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it all pans out, like what they sort of surrendered to have a franchise show up, but let's move on to me now, I guess. I mean, I'm still a writing tutor. I mean, the center is still trying to generate some more outreach and promotion for students to get like help with their writing and everything. Like the most interesting class I think I'm gonna take this semester is concept of design. That's a class for like non-art majors, and still it sort of like surprised me that I had to buy like a pillowcase. It's just like as big as a pillowcase of like art supplies. I wasn't thinking I was going to actually like produce art. But no, I'm doing it. It's about like Tuesday and Thursday, doing 2.5 hours in a studio class. So that should be a ton of adventures. But the biggest project ever I think I'm ever gonna have is in my senior seminar in professional writing, which is actually kind of a blend of like professional advice on a career and also conducting a research study in composition. So what I'm interested in is how writing is covered in all the different disciplines around your college. So what does, for instance, a chemistry or a nursing professor tell their students to do as far as like writing assignments or communication? Because I mean, every single career wants new employees that can effectively communicate. And so how are we sort of teaching? What methods are we using to instruct writing throughout the college? And I'm interested in examining all those different angles. So I'm going to send out a survey with the help of the Writing Center director and another professor. I got somewhere like middle 60s in responses. So there's a lot to go through, and I probably can't really share much about like what I find until the study's actually published later on. But that is certainly something I am interested in. And yeah, over the weekend I'm gonna have to apply to graduate because the deadline is on Tuesday. If I don't, there's like a $25 late fee on top of like the $60 or so it costs to apply, not counting the cap and gown also. But yeah, it should be a semester that keeps me fairly busy, and I'll be sure to share like some snippets of what's going on as I near the finish line, start pinning down a job, and battle that curse of senioritis. And as for what's on deck for this edition, we definitely need to talk about that government shutdown really quickly that came and went over the break. It's Big Game Sunday, and soon to be the third straight appearance of the New England Patriots, and I'll mention the only heroes that can stop them. Also in sports, there was a familiar face winning the most recent Grand Slam in tennis, and the numbers are also in for the amount of people getting injured on those rental scooters I spoke about last semester that are popping up in major cities. Perhaps I can debate about potentially who's to blame. Also, a call from environmental scientists to start creating something called artificial photosynthesis. So some technology news as well. And it's going to be a packed show, and it'll all fly by pretty quick. So how about we get into some music for this hour? Coming up next on In the Studio is a brand new single released this week from contemporary folk group Wild Rivers. This is Moving Target. I'll be back in 3 minutes here on WVYC. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. That was Wild Rivers with Moving Target, or as they'll say in a certain red and white brick and mortar store, Moving Target. Wild Rivers is actually kind of an odd combination group. Like there's these undertones of country music mixed in with their singing and instrumentals, and they're Canadian based too. With the polar vortex in the north, they might as well call themselves Frozen Rivers. But all my word playing aside, let's get to the first weather check on the hour. So let's get into the big story that took place from around Christmas time to just last week, January 25th. This is, of course, the government shutdown. An issue I thought honestly would be going on still by the time I got back inside the studio, because just the way it was deadlocked for so long, and neither side was willing to budge on this. Around 800,000 federal workers, I think, had to go without pay, were affected by this, and then an uncountable amount of individuals, like spouses and their children, that got wrapped up in this conflict. Now, it was a very debatable issue. that I think needs to be discussed. I mean, that being border security, I mean, the curbing of illegal immigration. But I'm probably one of the many who just thinks it wasn't worth it all to center the discussion around like whether the inner functions of this country can operate or not, like whether or not it hinges on it. So I mean, I'll put it like this now. I mean, the president, like while I guess he has the full right to veto a spending bill that Congress puts forwards, he made a mistake in not thinking about how much his stubbornness would wind up affecting things. The Coast Guard, the TSA, airport security, air traffic controllers, the national parks, the immigration courts themselves trying to get people through the legal process. I mean, give those that got up to like go to work a heap of credit for doing their jobs and treating business as usual. But I mean, part of me wonders if as time went on, like a more organized resilience, like a larger protest from these payless workers, it might have fixed things sooner, perhaps. Because, I mean, as soon as you have things like airports being unmanned, while, like, it would be totally disastrous and freeze and cripple parts of the country, wouldn't that at least force a compromise sooner and teach the leaders in government that the people need the branches operational? And, I mean, if it's okay for these workers to go in without pay or have to, like look for new jobs in the meantime, they're the ones being held hostage when they're essentially supposed to be the working cogs in the machine and should never stop, basically. And I guess most of my issue is just that this shutdown turned out to be the longest one in history at like 35 days when it didn't need to be, and lawmakers were staring each other down while the citizens got inconvenienced, and it went on long enough. I actually had no idea like the second longest shutdown was for 21 days under President Clinton. I thought this recent one would be like far and away the lengthiest, like 3 weeks more instead of 2. And there were 8 shutdowns under Ronald Reagan's presidency apparently, so to me, there's as big of an inclination as ever that this sort of event will happen again in a president's term as tumultuous as Trump's. And hasn't he given like Congress like until February 15th when this current bill by him runs out? So 2 weeks until we might have to bring this up again, because I can guarantee you that wall project isn't getting any closer to completion now that the Democrats own the Congress. And I know this is wishful thinking, but really the only way Trump can possibly get this done is if he changes a majority of the minds about what this country needs along the southern border. One of the polls by the Washington Post and ABC News said about 50% of the country they polled blamed Trump and the Republicans, 34% on Democrats, and 10% on both parties. I'd probably be somewhere in the middle. But the point is that the way you get those numbers to change, to shift sides, there's dialogue and evidence that needs to be traded to signify that the apparent crisis is worse as it is. I mean, Trump is listening to a very small and narrow base about what this country needs the most, essentially. And where you get your media and your facts and your assumptions that this is an issue all basically varies. You often hold fast to that knowledge. So that's why I can't see this going any place except to more trouble. I'm basically finished talking about it to this point, and we'll see what comes to the table later on. Plain to say, but not much point to it. We'll move on and get into the station's playlist for our next track of the hour. Coming up next, it is Andrew Bird with Sisyphus? I don't know, but give it a listen. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and I'll be back in a few. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. Andrew Bird with Sisyphus. And let's move on to the world of sports. Now, the Australian Open finished up on Monday, much quieter than it did with the US Open towards like the midway of last semester. The men's final was kind of run-of-the-mill. 2 giants of the sport in Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic facing off, with the latter claiming his 7th championship trophy in this specific event alone. And he's just nuts when it comes to like hard surface courts. Whereas he flattened his opponent in a breeze, the women's final was much closely contested, but featured a familiar champion there as well. This is Naomi Osaka, that underdog who beat Serena Williams in the US Open late 2018, She did it again with a win over Petra Kvitova. I actually had no idea Osaka was already up to like fourth in the world coming into this tournament, and now she's practically guaranteed first for a while. I almost feel like this championship this time around is like fittingly quieter compared to the last one, even though she's like won two straight major events. And it all ties back to that controversy with Serena about those penalties in the final while against Osaka. And even though like a newcomer walked away with a trophy in that event, the conversation a week later was how rule officials treated women of color, a whole debate about bias. It's been only 4 days since the Australian Open final, and the news is relatively quiet. I still don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing for a young talent who deserves the positive recognition. I mean, Naomi Osaka's a year younger than me, for one thing. It's pretty crazy. But you actually might have missed the story regarding Osaka earlier in the tournament about how she was portrayed in an advertisement, though. So Nissin Foods, who you might remember in the supermarket for their cup noodle products, the bowls you can just throw in the microwave with broth and vegetables. This Japanese company took the two biggest icons from their country in the sport of tennis. So Kei Nishikori for the male, and Naomi Osaka. And they portrayed them in this cartoonized commercial. The company had to retract it because people were full-on accusing it of whitewashing. Osaka's biracial herself and has much tanner skin than most Japanese nationals. So, like, the depiction of her with, like, peach skin and light brown hair rightfully bothered a lot of people. And, I mean, I saw the depiction as well. I mean, you can maybe look it up for yourself. It looks nothing like her. And I'd like to think it's a consideration that as an athlete gains more of a celebrity status, the advertisers that are going to use them as spokespeople like nail down what group or groups like the individual represents, symbolizes. And ultimately, this story shouldn't take away from what Osaka achieved, and I mean that's a second straight Grand Slam, and hopefully, I mean later on, her legacy keeps building. Because even though having someone like her winning in place of, say, Serena Williams, who's, I mean, trying to collect the most major event wins and become the greatest ever, new blood, I think, needs to have that time in the spotlight. And it's also why this Sunday, for one night only, I'm becoming a Los Angeles Rams football fan. I'll tell you more why that's the case in a little bit, but I should read the hourly PSA as we're coming up to that, and I'll get back to sports in a minute. So yes, I chose the underdog Los Angeles Rams. I should really honestly hate this team since they're a division rival of like my favorite San Francisco 49ers. But right now, they are in the best position to possibly stop Tom Brady from getting a 6th Super Bowl win. It's his second attempt at trying to become the first quarterback ever to stand alone with that record after the Eagles robbed him last year. But to go back to the Rams, I mean, no doubt you heard about the no-call controversy in the conference championship game 2 weeks ago, where an LA defender tackled a New Orleans Saints receiver who was running his passing route near the end zone, and there wasn't a penalty call because of it. And everyone hates the inconsistency of referees enough, and they probably do even more now, but this sort of like circumvented this Super Bowl from becoming a tale of like two old guys at quarterback, Tom Brady and Drew Brees, having an elite showdown this Sunday. And I think it flipped the stage to be like, it's about will the Rams, who got lucky to not be caught playing shady, beat the established cheaters in the Patriots who were pinned for like Spygate and Deflategate in the past. It's probably not going to be the most honest story ever, but if I had little faith in the Eagles last year of defeating the Patriots, and yet they surprised me with a huge upset, I think it's time to have the same faith in the Rams. And it's actually been quite a journey for the Rams, considering they only recently moved to from St. Louis to Los Angeles, and their quarterback has only 3 years worth of experience in the NFL. This is talking about Jared Goff, if you've never heard of him, leading this team. if you actually want to drag in some odd coincidences to set this game up as fate, consider the fact that it was the Patriots versus the St. Louis Rams in 2001 that began the whole Brady dynasty, where he got his first Super Bowl win. But then also, and it probably doesn't count, it's kind of a stretch, but Jared Goff and Naomi Osaka's birthdays are only 2 days apart, October 14th and October 16th, respectively. Goff's got a 3-year advantage, but still, I'll give credit to Brady that he is a once-in-a-generation talent for sticking with the same team for 19 seasons now, and appearing in 11 Super Bowls. But I don't even think this will be the last time he shows up. Because, like, the guy's he's only 42 or something, and says he just wants to keep going until he's 45. So, I mean, he can wait another year, at least I think. I'm sure I'll briefly talk Super Bowl ads next week, but really quick, what kind of fascinates me the most is just how ludicrous sports betting actually is on this single day. So, I mean, this is the first NFL championship since the Supreme Court legalized the practice. So, tons of money is going to be passed around homes, apartments, offices, and of course, like the gambling parlors. CBS News thinks an estimated $6 billion will be wagered. 1 in 6 people tuning in will have money on the line. And I didn't realize how important these prop bets were to people. These are like official wagers on stuff like how long the national anthem will be sung, what color Gatorade is going to be poured over the winning coach, who scores the first touchdown, whether the coin toss falls heads or tails. Wow, like 97% of sports betting is technically illegal, and just like colleagues trading bills over little details, gambling in small amounts. It's still probably as big of a pastime as the big game itself. I certainly have nothing but plastic in my wallet, and nobody in my apartment really watches sports, but I can basically keep my money on hand for that. We'll see how the game goes and touch on it next week. Advertising talk and maybe some blown calls, probably all over the place. But it's about 3:32 now at your College of Pennsylvania, and let's send you back to the music with this next track from the Barr Brothers, titled "Song That I Heard." You're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. That was from the Barr Brothers, called "Song That I Heard," off their album Queens of the Breakers. So next up, I wanted to revisit a past story about motorized scooter sharing, now that some scrutiny's been done into whether these things are actually safe. In the big major cities, they mostly centralized like the western United States. Companies like Bird and Lime have their brand of electric scooters that you can rent by signing up to be a member, scanning a barcode on the front of them with your smartphone. If you might find them like locked up at a station or leaning against a building on the street, and then you can ride them like you're commuting from one place to another on like your own drivable taxi. But there's a small catch, obviously, as you're hopping from one scooter to another, like leaving the one you're finished with behind on a sidewalk for somebody else to pick up. Helmets aren't required for these things. That prompted some researchers at UCLA to examine 2 area hospitals for emergency room visits that centered around these rental scooters. And they found that around 250 people were injured from August 2017 to September 2018. And it's not a bad number. I mean, less than a person a day, but this is still only concentrated in one city, after all. To put things into perspective, 92% were scooter riders, and 8% were pedestrians who maybe collided with a rider or tripped over like a parked scooter. Let's see, 11% were minors under the age of 18, and thankfully, but still shockingly, 12 were intoxicated when an accident happened. But perhaps worst of all, this is the big one, only 10, not 10%, just 10 of those riders in accidents were documented as wearing a helmet. So the study even observed like a busy intersection in Los Angeles for like 7 hours to spot electric scooter riders, and out of 193 people they spotted going by, about 94% weren't wearing a helmet. And if you factor that into like the common list of, so here 40% head injuries, 32% fractures, and 28% cuts, sprains, or bruises. I mean, it sounds like quite a mess for this particular city. To again put it in perspective though, those 250 scooter accidents are up against the 100,000 ER visits made to those two area hospitals in that year's span. I'd call it a fraction, but it's up to your interpretation the number of ways people could get hurt and are definitely doing so. Now, scooter sharing companies like Lime and Bird are in about 90 or so cities across the country, focused, on the west and east coasts. But Pennsylvania is actually one of the few states without any of them available. So in theory, this situation is different with every region. And in response, these companies keep advocating for the use of helmets, though they aren't necessarily required to ride. A spokesperson for Bird responded to this study that the amount of reported injuries is actually less than 1% of the number of successful scooter rides. But obviously, someone falling and going home to put on a bandage isn't really a worthy accident for this count, so some data has got to be missing in the grand scheme of things. And I don't know, like when I talked about this before, I was still in the middle of the road with how these companies spring up in congested cities trying to fix a traffic problem, like a vehicle emissions problem. And these scooters that can go up to 20, 25 miles per hour or so, I'd call that a speed that requires helmets. And yet the state of California passed a bill supported by these companies, like removing the law that says every individual over 18 still needs to keep a helmet on. Now, at least in that region, only minors have to comply with the helmet law. But there's one city that is really reluctant to get into this sharing trend, and that's New York City. I mean, rented bikes are certainly available from the major companies out there, but those use pedals instead of motors. As one of the most populated places in the world, I mean, especially in this country, these businesses would like a lot to be able to spread those electric scooters there. And there's organized rallies taking place on occasion that tell the departments of transportation and motor vehicles here and there to basically let the everyday person choose how they'll get around. There's like a revolution in mass transit going on in populated hubs around America, but here, there in York, there really isn't even a sidewalk to ride around on. Too many potholes for that to realistically happen, but we'll keep an eye on how things develop, especially now that New York State Governor Cuomo, he gave his endorsement to some legislation to allow these electric bikes and scooters in major cities inside the state. So it'll take some time for the results of that to be known, obviously, when the votes happen. But either way, I think that's about it for this topic. It's about 3:41. I think we'll get the second weather check of the hour out of the way. So you are listening still to In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger here on 88.1 FM. I'll take a short break and be back with some technology news after this song from the Faded Paper Figures. It's Lost Stars. You're listening to WVYC, and I'll be back to close out soon. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the Faded Paper Figures with Lost Stars. And small stories to close out the hour. First one, quickly, about carbon dioxide. So this is an invisible gas. It's what we breathe out of our bodies, and it's a byproduct of our fossil fuels, but it's toxic. In high concentrations, if you're in an airtight space with no ventilation, it can really damage your health, put you in danger of suffocation. You can estimate the amount of CO2 particles in the air with a label called parts per million, and this is going to be important. So, half a century ago, the levels were about 300 parts per million or so. Today, it ranges about 400 to 500 parts per million, depending on how rural or urban the setting is. Indoors, where there's little ventilation, though, that number can be about 1,000 parts per million on average. And that's about the level where researchers have found there's a 15% decrease in cognitive function, brain activity, when CO2 levels are that high. By 2,000 parts per million, you get into symptoms of maybe sleepiness, loss of attention, a slight chance of nausea or lightheadedness, and those are some bad effects. And yet even in like indoor spaces like classrooms, offices, bedrooms, cars even, the carbon dioxide parts per million could be around 1,000 to 4,000. If you're wearing a motorcycle helmet, you can be anywhere up to a maximum of 10,000 parts per million, which is not a good idea for operating any kind of vehicle. So while you can't crack open a window this time of year, like a plant or two could maybe help indoors, but that probably won't change the carbon levels creeping up around the world from the emissions of fossil fuels. So what's a solution? Well, a countermeasure comes from a group of German scientists asking the world to invest in artificial photosynthesis. This comes from an article published in a journal named Earth System Dynamics. So we all know what plants do. I mean, take in carbon dioxide and water and use sunlight as an energy source so these organisms can live and grow. They give off oxygen. And from what it sounds like, and keep in mind, this is mostly imaginative so far, and there's no physical like facilities where this happens yet. But if you set up solar panels and convert the light into electricity, you can connect that power to giant, just like huge tubs of water with carbon dioxide dissolved into it and separate out the oxygen from within. What's left over is referred to as an alcohol-based byproduct, so relatively useless pools of liquid. And where can it go? The scientists suggest back into the ground, sending it down to oil fields that have been emptied out. So it kind of sounds like the cycle goes full circle. Like we dig up oil and burn it in our vehicles and factories. We create a bunch of carbon dioxide that effectively heats up the planet. So, I mean, as we like cut down forests and lessen plant life, we just need these hypothetical factories or something of our own that can pull in the atmosphere, drag out the carbon dioxide, convert it, and then fill in the holes that we made extracting oil. It feels like science fiction to me to like try and cool down the earth that way. And I mean, it really isn't even close to becoming a mainstay around the world. Like there's a comparison in this article from Popular Science that if you cover an area the size of Hawaii in artificial photosynthesis facilities, you can hopefully replace an area the size of Europe that used to be covered in actual plants. And it's hopeful thinking, but it's nowhere near becoming a reality. Now, this article doesn't even feature like drawings or photographs of what the real things could look like that would make this possible. But these scientists would really, really like the world to invest in trying to make it happen in the next few decades. It won't be very cost effective, is the thing. It'd take a lot of money to first research and develop this technology, even more to build the facilities, and then having ways to transport the byproducts back into the earth. But I have to hand it to the environmentally conscious that they've got an idea on their hands here that can slowly get the carbon-oxygen balance back in the air. The simplest thing right now, though, they do admit, is to just get everyone to lessen carbon emissions and go from there. But artificial photosynthesis is just a farther option away than solar panels and electric vehicles, but that's all it is. It's another option. And I forgot to add something at the beginning of the show when I was talking about this writing composition study that I'm doing in my senior seminar in professional writing class. I'm also hopefully going to participate in another study that examines how the system of, well, like I should probably plan it out this way. So there's the senior seminar professional writing, but in order to take that class, there was a writing course called Research Methods in Writing. Which basically had us research like what kinds of writing or what kinds of research is out there, and sort of practice how we'd propose our own study and how we'd go about conducting it. And what some of the professors and faculty in this school are interested in knowing is how that knowledge sort of transfers from this writing 280 into writing 480, this senior seminar. And we're actually a very unique college that has a writing major. And it's one of the things that attracted me to this school to begin with. That most schools only have like a small minor in writing or something like that, but we're full on writing sort of like research and thorough studies into how composition is made and everything. So maybe like teaching the rest of the country sort of how we do it, how we sort of conduct these research projects is going to be something useful for everybody else to learn about. So maybe I'll participate in that. I mean, again, can't really talk too much about the details, but yeah, that'll just about do it for this episode of In the Studio. And before I head out, I wanted to make a few final announcements as well. So open house is tomorrow afternoon, and potential freshmen will get to see what the college looks like when it's covered in a blanket of snow. But that means Johnson Dining Hall will be closed for students and open only to the visitors until about 4 p.m. I also believe West Campus's dining hall, Spart's Den, and of course the new Starbucks are all open at their normal times. Also, campus safety's made everyone aware that a helicopter from Met-Ed Utility will be doing aerial inspections on Monday and Tuesday next week. Essentially, they say, like, don't be surprised to see a low-flying, slow-moving black helicopter hovering above campus as they check out power lines and stuff. The Campus Activity Board also announced the spring concert for this upcoming March. It's a York College tradition. It'll be featuring an artist named Steve Aoki. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But his whole act is basically electronic dance music, house, if you want to put it a little more specifically. I've never really heard of him before, but from what I understand, he's basically a producer or composer of beats and instrumentals. So while you won't necessarily hear him sing, I think with the many times he's collaborated with other artists, there will be like pre-recorded lyrics being sang while he acts as a DJ. And I think that maybe like WVYC has an opportunity to like maybe give out free tickets or something like that to listeners that are tuning into some of the shows on here. Because I mean, I'd certainly volunteer to be one of those hosts with like a giveaway to hand out. Because I mean, let's face it, I probably wouldn't be first in line for the show. But yeah, that'll do it today for me. And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out the past shows by going to youtube.com and searching In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger. And I mean, don't worry if you can't really like spell my first name or whatever. I mean, you could try and sound it out phonetically. Google's results are actually pretty good at like getting close to my last name, even though you might be unsure of it. But anyway, I hope I can catch you next week, here on 88.1 FM next Friday. And until then, once again, my name is Keelan Tollinger, and we will be leaving things off with Maggie Rogers and her song Light On. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Would you believe me now?